My Uncle Warren died on a Tuesday, and the lawyer called me on a Thursday, and by Saturday I found out he'd been married for 6 years to a man I'd never once heard of. That's the part nobody in my family wants to talk about, so I guess I'll be the one to say it. Uncle Warren, who came to every Thanksgiving alone, who always had some excuse about being too busy for relationships, who my mom used to joke was married to his job. He had a husband, a whole husband, living 2 hours away in a cabin none of us knew he owned, and according to the will, that cabin now belonged to both of us. Me, his only nephew, and a guy named Theo, who I had never met in my life, who apparently had been the most important person in my uncle's world for the better part of a decade. I want to be clear that my first reaction wasn't anger. It was more like vertigo, like the floor tilted, and I had to relearn how a person I thought I knew actually fit together. The lawyer, this tired older woman named Ms. Okafor, said the will required both of us to physically be present at the property within 30 days to jointly determine disposition of the estate, which is lawyer speak for you two have to go stand in a cabin together and decide what to do with it, whether you like it or not. So that's how I ended up driving 2 hours out to the middle of nowhere on a Saturday morning, gripping the steering wheel too hard, rehearsing conversations I had no idea how to actually have. The cabin was smaller than I expected. Wood siding has gone silver with age, a porch that sagged a little on one side, smoke already coming from the chimney when I pulled up, which meant he was already there, which meant I didn't get the small mercy of arriving first. He came out onto the porch before I even had my seatbelt off, taller than I pictured somehow. Dark curly hair he clearly hadn't bothered to do anything with, a flannel that looked like it belonged to somebody else, sleeves too long, and this expression on his face that I recognized immediately because I was probably wearing the same one, somewhere between grief and dread and just plain not knowing what to do with your hands. "You're Caleb," he said, not really a question. "Yeah, you're Theo." "Yeah." We stood there for a second, just looking at each other, both of us clearly having built the other person up into something in our heads over the past few days, and neither of us knew if what we'd built matched what we were seeing. "Do you want to come in?" he said finally. "It's cold. I made coffee. I don't actually know if you drink coffee." "I drink coffee." "Okay, good, that's okay." Inside, the cabin looked lived in, which threw me more than I expected. I think some part of me had pictured this place like a stage set, something staged for an affair temporary. It wasn't that. There were books with cracked spines on a shelf, a coffee mug with a chip in it that clearly got used every single day, a sweater draped over a chair like someone had just taken it off. This was somebody's actual home. My uncle's actual home, apparently, at least some of the time, in a life he never told any of us about. "How long were you together?" I asked, before I even sat down, because I couldn't hold it in anymore. Theo's hands tightened around his own mug. 6 years in January, we would have been 6 years. And none of us knew. He didn't want you to know. I want to be really clear that this wasn't my choice if that's, I know how this looks. Like I was some secret he was hiding for fun. It wasn't like that. He was scared. His family, your family, I don't know exactly what happened, but somewhere along the way he decided being honest about who he loved was going to cost him everyone he had left, and he'd rather have half of us than risk losing all of us. I didn't say anything for a second. It's a strange thing, hearing someone explain your own uncle to you like they knew him better than you did. The worst part was, they probably did. "I'm not mad at you," I said eventually, because I could see him bracing for it, like he'd expected this conversation to go a certain way and had already built armor for it. "I don't think I'm mad at anybody yet. I think I'm just trying to catch up." Something in his shoulders eased, just slightly. "Yeah, same, honestly. I've had 6 years to prepare for people finding out, and somehow none of that prepared me for you actually standing in his kitchen." We spent that first day mostly just talking around the actual point of the visit, the whole legal reason we were there. Ms. Okafor had said we needed to decide, within 30 days, whether to sell the cabin or figure out some kind of arrangement, and neither of us brought it up directly, like if we didn't say it out loud the decision could wait a little longer. Instead, Theo showed me around, a little awkwardly, narrating the cabin like a tour guide who wasn't sure if the tourist actually wanted the tour. This was where Warren kept his fishing gear. This was the mug he always used. This was the window Warren liked to watch storms from, which struck me weirdly, because I never once thought of my uncle as someone who liked watching anything. In my head he was always working, always tired, always slightly somewhere else at family things. "He seems different here," I said. That's how I knew him. He probably was different here. People are allowed to be different in different rooms of their life. I think that's just what it is, when you're not free everywhere. I looked at him for a second too long after he said that, because it landed heavier than I think he meant it to, or maybe exactly as heavy as he meant it to. I couldn't tell yet. I didn't know him well enough to read him. That night we ended up eating dinner together, not because either of us suggested it exactly, more because it got dark and we were both still there, and it seemed stranger to eat separately in the same small cabin than to just eat together. He made pasta, apologized for it twice before I even tasted it, and it was fine. It was good actually, and I told him so, and he looked surprised, like compliments weren't something he expected from me. I thought you'd hate me, he admitted, somewhere around his second glass of wine. Why would I hate you? I don't know, inheriting half your uncle's estate out of nowhere, being the reason you're finding out things about your family that probably hurt. I built you up as, like, the angry nephew in my head. I had a whole version of you ready to fight with. I'm not really a fighter, I said. I think I'm more of a sit with it quietly and feel weird for 3 weeks kind of person. He laughed at that, this surprised laugh, quick and real. That's fair. That's a whole personality type, honestly. What's your version? Are you a fighter? No, I don't know. I go quiet too, but differently. I go quiet and then I say the wrong thing eventually, because I couldn't hold it anymore. Is that what's happening right now? He looked at me, something flickering across his face. Maybe, I don't know yet. We didn't decide anything that first day about the cabin, and Ms. Okafor's 30-day deadline meant I ended up coming back the next weekend, and then the weekend after that, telling myself each time it was purely practical, purely about sorting through my uncle's things, purely about figuring out logistics. It wasn't purely about logistics. I think I knew that by the third visit, when I found myself looking forward to the drive out there more than I wanted to admit, more than made sense for someone I'd known less than a month. Theo was there every time. I never asked if he had somewhere else to be. I think some part of me didn't want to know if the answer was that he'd rearranged his life to be there when I was there. The third weekend, we ended up going through boxes in the back room together, and Theo held up an old photo, one of Warren younger than I'd ever seen him, laughing at something off camera, looking lighter than any version I ever knew. I never saw pictures of him like this, I said. Growing up, he always looked so held together, like everything was an effort. That's what closets do to people, Theo said quietly. They make holding still look like the only safe option. Did he ever talk about us, my side of the family? Theo hesitated, and I could see him deciding how honest to be. He talked about you a lot, actually, more than anyone else. He said you were the one who might understand eventually, if he ever told anyone. He just never got the courage to test it. That hit me harder than I expected. I had to put the photo down for a second, had to just breathe through it. This sudden grief that wasn't really about losing my uncle, it was about losing the chance to have told him it would have been fine, that I would have understood immediately, easily, no hesitation at all. Theo noticed, of course he noticed. He'd apparently gotten good at noticing things about people who were hurting, probably from years of watching Warren carry things quietly. Hey, he said, you okay? Not really, but I don't think that's your fault. I didn't think it was, I just wanted to ask anyway. He sat down next to me on the floor, close enough that our shoulders were almost touching, and neither of us moved away from that, and we just sat there for a while, surrounded by boxes of a life neither of us fully understood, grieving the same man from two completely different angles. Can I tell you something that's going to sound insane? I said eventually. Sure. I think I like being here more than I should. Like, more than the estate stuff requires. I keep finding reasons to come back, and I don't think they're real reasons. He was quiet for a second, long enough that I started regretting saying it. I noticed you kept coming back, he said finally. I didn't want to say anything because I didn't want to be the reason you felt weird about it, if it wasn't, if I was wrong about what I thought that meant. What did you think it meant? I thought maybe you liked being around me, and I didn't know if that was insane of me to think, given, the circumstances, your uncle, all of it. It felt like a really bad time to be having feelings about anyone, let alone the person tangled up in the middle of your family finding out something huge. It is a bad time, I said. Objectively, this is probably the worst possible time. Yeah. I still think I like being around you anyway. He looked at me then, really looked, and something passed between us that felt too big for the small room we were sitting in, surrounded by a dead man's photographs, both of us grieving him differently and finding each other in the middle of it in a way neither of us had planned for or asked for. I don't want this to be complicated, he said. I've spent 6 years being the complicated part of somebody's life. I don't want to start something else that has to live in secret too. It doesn't have to be secret, I said. I'm not him. I'm not scared the way he was scared. You say that now. I mean it now. I can't promise you every version of the future, but I can promise you I'm not going to make you a secret the way he had to make you one. Something shifted in his face, some wall coming down that I don't think he even meant to let down, and when he leaned in it wasn't fast or dramatic, it was slow, almost careful, like he was giving both of us time to change our minds, and neither of us did. The kiss was quiet, not the kind of quiet that comes from nervousness, more the kind that comes from two people who have both been carrying something heavy and finally set it down for a second. When we pulled back, he let out this breath, half laugh, half something else. That happened in the middle of your uncle's old photo boxes, he said. That's a lot. It's a lot, I agreed. I don't regret it though. It's me neither. We didn't figure out the cabin that day either. Ms. Okafor's deadline came and went, and we ended up filing for an extension, and I think we both knew, even if we didn't say it directly, that the paperwork was becoming an excuse to keep circling back to each other rather than an actual obstacle we were trying to solve. It's been almost a year now. We kept the cabin. Neither of us could stand the idea of selling the one place Warren ever got to be fully himself, and it felt wrong somehow to erase that just because it was inconvenient or complicated to hold on to. So it's ours now, both of ours. We split time between the city and out there most weekends, and Theo still makes the same pasta, still apologizes for it every single time even though I've told him 100 times it's good. I put some of Warren's old photos up on the wall by the window he liked to watch storms from. The one where he's laughing at something off camera, younger than I ever knew him, lighter than I ever saw him. I like to think he'd be glad somehow that the cabin didn't just sit there as a monument to something hidden, that it turned into something else instead, something that got to exist in daylight, the way he never quite let himself. Theo asked me last week if I ever regret how all of this started. The lawyer's call, the stranger on the porch, finding out about an entire hidden half of a person I thought I knew completely. I told him no. I told him the cabin was only ever the beginning of something, and I didn't know that yet when I first pulled up that driveway with my hands too tight on the wheel, bracing for a fight that never actually came. He didn't say anything back. He just reached over and took my hand, the way he does now without even thinking about it, easy, unhidden, exactly the opposite of everything the cabin used to represent. I think that's the part I keep coming back to, honestly, not the loss. Even though the loss is still there, still real, still something I carry. It's that grief cracked something open in my family's story, and instead of that crack just being a wound, it turned into a door. And on the other side of that door was somebody I never expected to find, holding half of a man I thought I knew, and somehow between the two of us, we put together a whole person my uncle never got the chance to be out loud. I don't know if that's a happy ending or just an honest one. Maybe those are the same thing, more often than people think.